I'm pretty easy when I'm up here in front of anybody talking, because it means that if I say something, you can say something if you want to. Okay, ask any questions, interrupt at any point in time. I'm not gonna wear my professor hat and be very clinical with things. I'm just gonna talk to you about this. But what, a little bit of background to tell you why I'm where I am with you today is that professionally, I was a pediatric clinical instructor at the nursing program at Northwestern, but at many years of that, there's also some correlation between pediatrics and geriatrics and dementia particularly, I think, in the way you can manage situations and people. So I guess maybe that's a start of understanding older care. And then, of course, I got older, and so now I really want to understand it. But then also, personally, between my husband and myself, we have taken care of family member number 6 going through this. Okay, so I know where you are, and each of us has our own situation, but I do understand whatever your situation is. I'm empathetic to it. Anyway, so one of the main things that I thought would be helpful to you is for us to just talk about, in general, making decisions. That can be everything from as simple about as how to get up on time in the morning when we gotta get up and get going, or it can be as difficult as making decisions about end-of-life care. It's all decision making, and we've all made decisions our entire lives, right? You've had to make all kind of decisions. And now you're faced with some kind of hard ones, I think, every day. But anyway, I thought, well, maybe if we talk about the ethics of decision making a little bit from books, you know, a little bit the way the research says, but then I'm gonna open it up to y'all, and we're gonna have a discussion about maybe particular situations you bumped into, and either what you did or what you need to do or thinking about, that kind of thing. So when I think about the hard job of making hard decisions, because that's where the title came from, because a lot of times, and I know every one of you have been in a situation where you had to decide something for yourself or your person, special person. You had to decide something, and it was hard. You didn't feel right. You didn't want to have to do it. You didn't have to want to be the one to decide something. So, and I apologize for the voice today, by the way. I am dry. I think it's this weather change. So I have to drink water, sorry. Anyway, I think that challenges come in when our emotions get into it. And you can't be non-emotional when you have a loved one, but it kind of complicates things when it comes to decision making. And what it oftentimes leads you to is inertia. How you feel and what your brain says is the thing to do bump into each other, and they push even against each other, and you can't go anywhere. You can't move through it. Or if you move through it and you follow this head side of things, if you move through it following your head, your heart hurts. And if you move through it following your heart, sometimes what you did doesn't turn out to be exactly what it ought to be. And I'm not going to give you a clear-cut answer. I'm going to give you some ways to think about it and try to help you the next time you bump into one of these situations to try to figure out how you want to move through it and go to the next step. So again, ask any questions, interrupt at any time. But I want to give you some tools first by way of some definitions of words you probably already know, but I'll tell you anyway so we're all on the same page. And then we're going to go from those definitions to a framework for applying those definitions to, there's only 4 of them, so don't get panicked over it, but to help you use it in a sequential way to think through any kind of a situation that you have. Okay, I hope that will give you some, my goal is that you'll walk away thinking about different approaches you might take, and it'll ease your challenges just a little bit, anyway. So, the first word that I wanna talk about is autonomy. And I'm gonna put these 4 words up here. What they are is a part of the core principles of ethics. And we're gonna have 8 of them, but 4 that are the core principles, 4 more that help things. So, anybody wanna jump in and tell me what autonomy means to you? Nope. Nobody wants to jump in. Okay, so autonomy is, you have autonomy to a point. None of us have full autonomy in our lives, but autonomy is the ability and the permission to do what you want to do and do what needs to be done and be in charge of yourself. And you guys have autonomy, and everybody in there needs their autonomy as well. They need to be a little part of, the decision making, the things that have to happen with them, need to be part of it and help decide. Sometimes that's easier than others. We'll talk about that. The next one, I was trying to go in order here so I could look. The next one is, hope I spell right when I do this, beneficence. Okay, beneficence, there. Doing good. Your choice, your decision you make is good. Good for whom? Good for you or good for your person? Sometimes there's conflict there, right? So we're looking, when we make decisions, trying to think about whose good are we serving in which situation? And it really is situational. And so then we want to do good when we do it. All right, the next one that I want to give you is, because it kind of goes with it, non-maleficence. Big old words, aren't they? How do you spell maleficence? I think that's right. Anyway, non-maleficence, that's kind of the opposite of this. Just don't do bad. All right, so sometimes you can't do the best of good, but you can do okay, and that's non-maleficence. When you have to kind of settle a little bit, but you're not causing harm, you're not doing something bad that's gonna hurt anybody in any way. And then the 4th one is gonna be justice. Now this one is not one that we work with a lot in dementia care, but justice is just fairness, what's right in terms of being fair to everybody that's involved in a situation. Okay? So those are things that, Alicia, this is probably gonna be you. Sir?
Ask you a quick.
Yes, you may.
Non-maleficence.
Non-maleficence?
Maleficence, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Somebody not harming anybody. You talking about physically, emotionally?
No, anyway, any kind of harm.
You talking about emotionally?
Yeah,
Okay.
it can be emotional, and oftentimes it is. It oftentimes, and the hard decisions when they have emotional aspects and strings attached to them are some of the
I
toughest.
think that's more difficult, that's more damaging than a
Well,
physical.
and you can't always see them coming.
Right.
You can't always see that coming, and that's a lot of what you have to deal with in this kind of care, I think. Then, I'm probably not gonna even write these words out there, because it'll just complicate things, but I will introduce them. If we're really talking about the full spectrum of ethical decision-making, the other four aspects of it, besides these core principles, the other four are fidelity, so that's being true to yourself and the people in the relationships with you. And veracity, which is truth to the people you're in a relationship with, and truth to yourself. So sometimes decision-making requires you to tell yourself the truth, even if you don't want that to be the truth. And to tell your person the truth, depending on their ability to grasp what you're saying to. And then, of course, you all know from signing a million times in a healthcare situation, the other two are confidentiality and privacy. And you're the guardians of your person's confidentiality and privacy, and you have to make decisions about how you guard that. And that has to do with to whom you allow, you're allowing them to be cared for by other people at certain times. And so do you have to protect their privacy and confidentiality of that? I mean, it's a million things where that comes in, but just know that that's a part of your decision-making process. Now, when I take these things into mind, these are the characteristics that you'll need to be using when you're making a decision. But now the process by which we want to apply this, the process, and that's where it gets kind of important, is to give you a straightforward process. Think back with me, and if you're like me, it was a long way back, but think back when you went to school. Did you get taught something called the scientific method? Does that ring a bell with you, the scientific method? And the first step in that scientific method was to identify a problem. Okay, that was number one. Guess we can know that. The next thing you had to do in order to, now you know there's a problem. The next thing you had to do was data collection. You had to get all the facts that were associated with it. And then you had to, this was your evidence, I guess, your evidence collection, and then you had to examine this evidence, and you had to make a plan of action. You needed to know what you wanted to accomplish, how you wanted to go about it, but you had to have a plan of action. And then once you had your plan, and I'll give you an example in just a minute, but these are the steps. Once you had your plan, then you needed to implement that plan. Now you don't know if you're right or wrong yet. So you have to implement. And so after you do, you begin to get a sense of whether you were right or wrong, whether, and you used these aspects, these four principles, to work out your plan and to put your plan into action. And now you're going to use them again to evaluate your outcome. Okay, now when you identified the problem, you probably also tried to look at a desired outcome. It's hard to read all that, but. So even in the beginning, you were down here trying to connect the dots. So you're working on a continuum through this. All right, so now we have kind of a process for applying our ethical framework over here. So hopefully you're seeing how those two things can kind of go together. Thanks, Ocean. And then, what do I want to tell you next? Now we're going to talk about some other step. And I'm gonna use my notes, some of this, just to be sure that I don't wander off on a pathway. This is how you're gonna start to decide if something is in your situation, if something is right or wrong, good or bad. And that's pretty clear cut, you know, hard line, right, wrong, good, bad. It's never that clear. They're fuzzy edge things. But the first thing is rights. Now, whose rights are we talking about? Well, I'm gonna say not necessarily. You have some rights too. Okay, as caregivers, you have rights too. And so now I'm muddying the waters a little bit, because our nature as caregivers, especially when we're really invested in it emotionally, our nature as caregivers is to always do right by the person we care for. But what if doing right by them makes your life so tough that it's, you know, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're sad, you're afraid, then maybe you left out looking at your rights. So somewhere there's a compromise where it is, and it's the situation usually shows that compromise. Okay? It's not, somebody's not gonna walk up and say, this is right, or this is your right, or this is their right. You're not gonna do that. You're just gonna have to weigh it, and you've got some terms up there, some core principles to think about. And I would say that if you get in a situation about where you're gonna have to maybe act differently than what emotionally you kind of feel like, you'll know if you're doing it, making the right choice by looking and saying, does this do some good? Does it not cause real harm? And that might be the emotional or the physical. You have to weigh that. Is it fair? And did my person have a say in it? But then turn that around and do the same thing to yourself. And right here's where I'm gonna interject that a paper tool sometimes is very helpful when you've got a serious situation to deal with. You take a tablet, you draw a line right down the middle of it. You write down everything that's good as it comes to your mind, everything that's negative. We'll put it positive and negatives in this sense, but everything that's negative. Now, you know, one column's gonna come out bigger than the other one. But you can go back and review all of that, and sometimes you move something from one side to the other when you look at how much good you're doing to whom. You know, so never leave yourself out as what your needs are, because you have to be good to you in order to continue to be good for them. You've heard that before, I know you heard that. All right, the next.
When you're
Yes,
talking about caregivers, does that include spouse, other family members, and paid?
It
What about
does.
hired or paid outside help?
And I think in that hierarchy that you just described, you know, spouse is gonna weigh a little heavier, family's gonna weigh right in under that, and then your volunteered or paid staff that comes in, they have to be considered too. You know, if you have, and this would be a bad situation, but it's one that happens, if you've got a person who is coping with dementia, and they're in a stage where they're combative, let's say, and that happens, and their paid caregiver, they're combative to that person. You know, do you keep the person there? How do you protect that person? You've gotta have somebody. So all of that is pieces of it, but you have to consider, you know, their rights too. And none of it's clear cut, but you have to go back to the principles and apply them through the situation and see what kind of outcomes can you get if this, or outcomes you get if that, and it helps you think through it. It's not gonna always give you the answer, and the answer it gives you is not always the answer you want. but it is a process that you can use. So then another lens that you can look through is, let's see, which one do I wanna give you? There's several, but they're not all applicable to dementia. I think, looking at the lens of utilitarian is another one. That's sort of, and that's going kind of answer your question. Okay, utilitarian lens says you look at it with how my action or my decision is gonna impact everybody else. And that's where that, impact on a paid caregiver might come in. And what you have to use this as is how to balance the beneficence and non-maleficence in the situation for everybody, or for an individual that you wanna target. Okay, and then we're gonna look at, specifically at, this is the hard one, and I'm gonna kind of star it, virtue. And we're only gonna do this one and one more, and then we're gonna get into specific situations and let you guys talk some instead of me. Virtue is where you look at the situation, the problem at hand, go through all of this, you come down to asking yourself, what kind of person am I if I, whatever, fill in the blank, but what kind of person am I? What do I feel about myself in this situation? And that's where you bring in your feelings about honesty and compassion and tolerance and self-integrity and the integrity of your person. How do you look at all of that and weigh it in and say, I'm going to feel good about myself when I get down here to this outcome, when I'm evaluating my outcome, I'm gonna feel good about what I did. It was hard, it was emotional, but I feel like it was beneficial, or I feel like it was not causing harm and it's the best of the situation. I feel okay about me as a person because of this choice that I made. And then the last one, and this one is important too, is what's called care ethics. And it, to me, kind of interacts a little bit with how you feel about yourself. Care ethics is about listening, actively listening in a relationship. So when you're with your person, however, whatever level they're able and do communicate with you, you actively listen. What are they really telling me? What is she saying? What is he meaning when he did that? And you're trying to figure it out, and you're just trying to think with, where are they in this? How can I maintain their as much independence for them? How can I be empathetic to them? Whatever choices you make there takes you back to how you feel at the end of your decision making. So that's way enough, just kind of facts and clinical aspects of decision making. But let me throw out a couple of examples of where I know people always have hard decisions to make. Some are little hard decisions, and some are great big hard decisions. And then I'm gonna ask you to, if you're willing, to share some of the times you have had, emotions and head bumping into each other where you were trying to work through something and trying to figure out how you would do it. And I guess right now, what my husband and I are dealing with is his sister, who, and this is an example, but his sister is 70 years old and physically very healthy, has been a brilliant person, was an attorney all her life, and very independent. And her husband passed away about a year ago, which was devastating to all of us, but it certainly complicated a lot of things because he had been aware of her beginning and moving forward Alzheimer's for probably 4 or 5 years. Didn't share it forward, that notion, until about a year before he just didn't wake up one morning. And so that, they lived down South Louisiana and live on a farm that has animals, like big ones and things. And so we had, they have 2 daughters, but neither of them live in the town where the farm is, just like we don't live where it is. So now we've got the sister-in-law who is very independent by nature, has a 10-acre farm with lots of animals. At that time, there were 38 sheep. That complicated a lot of things. And now we're down to 3 horses, 3 donkeys, and some number of dogs and cats. But, you know, feeding the animals. Well, so far she feeds the animals, except now we're thinking maybe sometimes she doesn't. So that's kind of a dilemma. But to have a conversation with her, if she walked in the door, she would come around, introduce herself to each one of you, ask something of what you do, where you're from, and have a good conversation. And you might not know that you were dealing with dementia. And it might take a little while before she went around the room again and did it. So we know she's got a lot of skill sets to cover up a lot of things. So where we have the problem now is her driving. Now, she lives rural, so it's a ways to wherever she goes. We've had the driving test done twice now, and mechanically she's excellent. She reads all the street signs, she gets it. She's gotten lost now. So we've got, trackers going, and between all of us, we get these beats and stuff, but she knows, if you say, what is your radius that you can drive? Well, I can drive, in my town, I can drive up to the next little town, which is 12 miles, because it's straight shot and you can't go anywhere but from here to there. But if she goes the other way, she gets into a lot of traffic, and then she gets confused. And she doesn't like that happens. So where's our dilemma? Can she drive, or can she not drive? Can you take the car away from somebody that lives out in the middle of nowhere? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And yet she's very capable of driving and can go exactly where she needs to go, except when she doesn't. And that's only happened a couple of times, but now it is happening. So that's a dilemma that we particularly face. And I'll give you one more story of a dilemma, and then I'm gonna quit, and it's gonna be y'all to talk about it. And then we'll see how we can help each other maybe use this framework. Because I could have used it a lot on this case. Some number of years ago, when I was taking care of my mom, who had also been fiercely independent and widowed a long time and took care of business and all of this kind of thing. And she was an end-stage heart. She developed dementia from the lack of oxygen. So she wasn't Alzheimer's, but dementia nonetheless. And she no longer could live alone, and I was still working, and I'm an only child, so it was me or nobody. And she couldn't stay alone. She fired everybody that I hired. And I wouldn't know that she had fired them until I got there and they were gone. And so that was a bit of a problem, and I ended up where I was staying nights with her because she was getting up. And finally, one of my wise friends that I taught with said, it's time to do something different. I couldn't make that choice on my own. I couldn't do it because the emotion and the head, emotion was shoving the head back over here, way far. And if I tell you the honest truth, I moved her to Montclair Park 4 times and moved her home. 4 times. Who does that? Was I thinking clearly? Was I using any kind of logic to make the hard decisions? I was not. And I couldn't, it was my mom. I wanted her to be happy. Well, sometimes happy is not good because she wasn't safe. I was doing harm by letting her happiness be the primary decision maker for me. I had to put her in a safer place where she couldn't go up and down the stairs that she fell on one time, and where if she fell getting up out of the bed to go to the bathroom, somebody was there to help her. You know, I had to move her, and it broke my heart, but I did it, and we ended up at Grace Home. By that time, it was just, let's go there, and that turned out to be the best thing in the world, because I had hospice care, and she was there for 6 months, so it was long-term, but I had hospice care, and what they asked me, and this was the thing that really registered that I wanted to share with you, is as hard as the choice was, and even as I went there to interview for her to go in, I wasn't firmly convinced that I could actually take her there, that I could do it, you know, this emotional side of it. But the nurse that was the intake, the director there, in the interview said, what would you want from us if she comes here? And I thought, I would want that the rest of her life, I get to be her daughter and not her nurse. Okay, and that's what they gave me. So even though in that situation, I was trying to maintain mother's autonomy, I really could not. That one had to be disallowed because it wasn't safe anymore. It just couldn't be. Even though mostly her thinking was pretty clear, but other things were hazardous. Was I going to be doing a good thing by moving her? Not in her mind, not in her mind. She was not happy. She was cooperative, sort of, but not happy. Was I doing a good thing for me to preserve my ability to be her daughter, which was important to both of us? Yes, I think so. Did I do harm? You know, was it, what is the non-maleficence? Did I do harm? I didn't really harm her. I maybe upset her a little bit by the move, but you know, she adapted pretty quickly. And we got that good time, quality time, going forward from that. Was justice served? Was it fair to both of us? I think, in fact, it was fair. And so I satisfied all of those things, identified the problem. She no longer could live alone, and I could not stay 24/7, given all the other variables in life that are part of your life too. That's part of getting your data collection, figuring out what's there. The plan was, okay, let's move her this time and stick with it. That was the plan. And so we put it into play, and it was a beautiful 6 months. It was hard to get to that point, but it was a beautiful 6 months. So that's a big issue kind of thing that's related to end of life. But there's some little things like, does it matter too much if, because sweets is what they can taste down the line, does it matter too much that they want brownies instead of green beans? Doesn't matter, don't fight those battles. Okay, because you're not gonna harm them by not giving them a perfect nutritional pyramid at this point. So don't fight that battle. You see, we've talked about a big problem, we've talked about little problems. So now, I'm through, it's your turn, so tell me, yes, sir?
Did you know she was that close to his life?
She could have been closer. I mean, what I knew was
6 months
that
instead of 6 years?
she could have been 6 days instead of 6 months. Because some days she went
Okay.
completely anoxic, because boom, she didn't have the oxygen and she was lightheaded and confused. So, and I had her on oxygen at home, and I was trying to manage that. I was giving her hospital type care at home, but I was doing it instead of somebody else.
My experience is I'm running into situations that I've seen people go in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen others, there's 20 years and they're still
just like they were when they started out. Mhm.
very close.
You just don't, you don't know those things. So you have to figure out, you know, that's part of your data collection is how long could this last? Where are we now? You've got to almost stay in the present with regard to the future is unknown because you don't know. But by the same token, any one of us could be right here now and could walk out the door and trip over that curb, hit my head, poof. You know, so you can't always decide how long could this last. You kind of have to think about how is it affecting my life, her life, right now, in the where we live now. Is it working like we are, or is it not? So those are, you know, and you're not all there at this point in time, but we all get there at some point, and have the decision to make. If you can keep someone home, and that works, then you can keep somebody home and that works. If you can't, because of all the variables, which is come together in this data collection phase, and you get all the data down on the tablet in the two columns, then you begin to be able to see, well, given what I see, I could make this choice or this one. Now, where is it over here? So you kind of figure, you know, you figure out your list, and then you can go from there. This is not a perfect plan. It's not perfect. It's just a process that you can try, and you can decide, you know, this worked or it didn't work. Because remember, down at the end, you evaluate the outcomes. I think that's where my short-term era was when I moved Mother the first times to Montclair and back, furniture and all, over there, back. Yeah, I was not looking at the whole picture. I just wasn't. I was operating with, you know, the emotions, because I'm a tender-hearted and very empathetic person, and I just couldn't, I wasn't buying into the situation, probably. But was it better in the long term when I finally made a definitive decision and then let that decision work, trusted it, that my head had made the right decision? Then what my head had decided, my heart came to meet it, and it all worked out really well. So know the process, you know, works. It's a tried and true process. It's just never gonna be simple. So now let's put this sticker over there, and in the time we've got left, y'all tell me about a situation that you wanna talk about. And it won't be any right answers, but we'll talk about how you might think of it.
I have a prime example.
What's that?
Laura and Paulette both, cause I called them in a panic. My husband is very independent, and he's always been a proud driver, and he's always been a good driver when, you know, until lately, and he gets lost now, and, he was driving fine just in our little neighborhood up to church or whatever, but I noticed he was slowing down, and that becomes, and I think that's one of the characteristics of it. Well, I've been discouraging him from driving. I talked to Dr. Megan Harris. She ordered a driving assessment test, which he took in December and failed mightily. And so we went back and talked with her, and she said, "Doc, you are not supposed to drive." And he heard it at the time, but he totally disregarded it, said that she didn't know what she was talking about, and that no girls were gonna tell him that he couldn't drive, meaning me and Dr. Harris, that he couldn't drive. But then I would distract him. But a couple of days after Christmas, I had to run some errands. I said, I need to run to the bank, I need to do this. Your truck needs to be driven. Let's go in your truck and I'll drive. And he says, do you want me to go with you? And I said, yeah. So we go out to his truck, he gets out there first, he gets in the driver's seat, and I said, no honey, I said, I need to drive your truck. We need to go back and get some gas in it and do this. "You're not telling me I can't drive my truck." And I tried to remind him, "You failed the driving assessment. You're not supposed to drive." And I had been debating about what to do with this truck, you know, and anyway, he took off at noon, and I was able to track him with my app, with the where's my friend or whatever app, until his phone went dead, which was fairly quickly. And then I had to rely on an AirTag I had put in the glove compartment, which only works when you are around an iPhone or wireless or Apple product. So I track him up, he's up north of Texarkana on the interstate, and I was able to get the AirTag to ping. He came back, he was all over lower Arkansas, southern Arkansas. He got into Louisiana. In the meantime, I called, and this was going on for hours. I did a silver alert with the police department, and the police officer came by, did a missing person report, which ordinarily wouldn't take until you tell them that it's a dementia patient. And anyway, so I called his sons from Dallas, and they said they were with me the whole time. They were also I was able to take photos of my map when the AirTag would ting, and I was sending it to his son. And I saw him come into Bossier. He got into Bossier, and I said, okay, maybe he can find his way here back to Shreveport. He could. He went off. Next time I know he's up north of Benton. He's headed that way. And I lose track of him out in the country because the AirTag wasn't working then. Then I saw him on Interstate 20 coming westbound, this side of Minden. And the police officer from Shreveport had told me when you get another ping on the AirTag, call that town and talk to the police and tell them to be looking for him. I had his license number on the description of the truck, everything about the truck. And so I see him on I-20. I call the Bossier police, and I told him I refer to the police report number of the missing person. And I said, would you please I'm hoping he's headed back to Bossier, because he's westbound. And I said, would you please be looking for him? And this is what the license plate and all the missing person information. Next thing I know, and then he left about noon. About 1 o'clock in the morning, he's been gone for 13 hours now. I get a call from the state police, and the state police said he had run into the ditch off of Interstate, and he managed to get the truck back up on the road. I don't know how, because then it wouldn't go into gear because it's a 6-speed, and he'd stripped all the underneath the transmission and stuff like that underneath the car, the truck, and it wasn't running. So the police were called, the state police were called because somebody reported an elderly man walking down the interstate. And I'm saying, okay, his phone he doesn't know how to charge his phone, although he's got a charger in the car. He doesn't know how to charge it. He doesn't know how to answer it. And, but anyway, so the police had said, he's okay, he's not hurt. And anyway, so he said, can you come out and get him? I said, I'm on my way. And it was like 1:30 by the time I got out there. And he wasn't hurt, thank goodness. There was no other vehicle involved. He said a deer ran out in front of him. I don't know if it did or not. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so the truck was towed in, and the state trooper talked with me. He said, is he okay? And I said, no, he's not supposed to be driving. That's why all this has happened. And he said, okay, well, I just want to make sure you knew that there was some problems. I said, I'm very aware. So the truck got towed in. I told the body shop, and of course the insurance says, we got towed, rental car coverage. I said, no, don't need it. Mm-hmm. And I talked with we had to go out the next day because he had, on his way out of this excursion, he had gone to the bank and taken out all of his money out of his checking account. I was able to see that online because I was able to ping him at the bank. So I quickly had to transfer some money because I knew he had some drafts coming through for insurance and all. So I quickly had to reopen that account with some money so that that wouldn't bounce. Anyway, we were in the car in the home, I said, do you have your money that you took out of the bank? I gave all that to the record driver. I said, you gave almost $10,000 to the record driver? You know, he said, well, that's what he wanted. I said, no, you know. We got home about 3. Bless her heart, Paulette was still texting me, asking if everything was okay. And, anyway, we went over to the wrecking yard the very next morning. As soon as they opened, after about 2 hours of sleep, thank goodness the money was still in his glove compartment. But we signed the papers to get a USAA to move the truck, and I have made arrangements. I don't even know, I told the body shop, take all the time you need, you know, as long as you want, take time. I don't even know how much damage we've got.
Park it on the rear 40 and don't fix it.
Well, no, I mean, we don't, no, my son's gonna buy it. He, because it's a 6 feet, it's got the tow package for a motorhome, and it has real low mileage. So, my son has already said, he lives in Oklahoma City. So I've got that worked out also with his children, that my son's gonna buy the vehicle. But in the meantime, I'm sitting there thinking, what am I gonna do, because I don't have children that live here that can drive a 6-speed. What am I gonna do about the car when it's ready, the truck when it's ready? But I've got it set up with a friend now, who said he'll go pick it up, take it to his house. In the meantime, my big decision was, what am I gonna do about his driving? And the hard decision I had to make was to file the report with the DPS, you know, the motor vehicles. And I reported all this, that he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, he refuses to complete, failed the driving assessment test, he refuses to comply, and he does not, he needs to have his license suspended. And I filed that report with the state. I hadn't seen a letter come in the mail yet, but I'm hoping that what they'll do is they'll mail him a letter and say it's been reported. When that happens, who am I gonna blame? I'm gonna lie like the devil, and I'm gonna say, the state trooper probably did it, you know. I don't know I can't, and it was a hard decision for me to try to do that, to do it.
Sure.
But you know, if he asked me outright, who did this, who filed a report, I'm just gonna have to say, well, it was a missing person, and he knows I filed a missing person report. And that's what I'm gonna tell him. And I know that's not
Well, you know,
truthful.
let's look at the comic papers yesterday in the Shreveport Times, when we come back to answer your question. The little comic strip Curtis, which I think is just clever as it can be. Curtis' mom is standing like this, looking at the kid in the room, and says, the room is a mess, you need to clean up your room. And Curtis' mind's always a step ahead of everybody else, and he's thinking, he doesn't ever come to the right answer, but he says something to the effect of, so I think roast beef for dinner would be great. See, that wasn't related at all to what Mom said, but it was off the wall. It diverted Mom to something else, and she said, oh, well, yeah, I was thinking about, you know, she followed that, and Curtis's thought is, when you know something bad is coming, just throw out a diversion. And
That's
so,
a good idea.
I think it is.
Good idea.
You know, it doesn't, it works on people without dementia, let me tell you. And so, and you can do it over again. If the diversion worked, you can use the same one again, because they maybe won't remember that you already did it once.
That's true.
And is that honest? Yeah, it's honest enough, but sometimes this is something to think about. We all want to be honest, and we talked about veracity earlier. We want to be honest, we want to be truthful. Sometimes the whole direct truth is right, and sometimes it's wrong. Here we are back to the title of our talk today. I think there are times when you just do this. I mean, if not telling them exactly, like, I'll help you look for your car keys in a bit, let me get the cake out of the oven. You don't have a cake in the oven, oh well. make a cake, I don't know, but he doesn't get car keys. Because he doesn't care if he's got a driver's license or not, or if it's recorded or not, or if it's been deleted or not. He wants to drive the car or the truck, and he'll drive your car instead
Well,
of
he
his
can't
truck.
find, he can't find any keys.
Not yet. So we just need to,
Had them very good.
well, or sometimes even people have resorted, if it gets to be a major happening frequently thing, resorted to, and you can buy these little kill lock boxes at the, Walmart or wherever that require a combination to open. And you can, it's work for you, but you can keep your keys in that. You just put them in there, you make the habit, and they're in there.
Yeah.
That reminds me. He likes to walk out the door. Now, he walked out the back door, tried to climb over a chain link fence.
Oh, God.
And broke his heel. Literally. In July. He tried to escape through the garage door. He opens the garage, the big double door, and he gets in the car, cause we only have one. I took his truck away from him a long time ago, we sold it, and my vehicle, we traded him in on a new car. So we only have one vehicle. He gets in my car, when I finally got in my car and found out where he was, it's like he had pushed every button. He knew I pushed a button to start the car, he knew that. But he didn't know that the key was in my purse. So he couldn't get the car started. So he was mad. He said some people were in the house and he had to get away. So I finally got everything straightened out. He hasn't driven in years, because Dr. Harris, we see her too, told him that he didn't need to be driving anymore. And he's been fine with that, But when we had two cars, of course, I had to get rid of his, even though it's his dream car, a truck, a blue truck. And, when we traded it, we gotta get a different car. We need a newer car. And now it's fine. But the reason we stopped him driving was because I was riding with him one time and ran a red light. Thank goodness no traffic was coming, or this lane hadn't started. And then he was with my dad, he was driving the car with my dad, and he ran a red light. Even though my dad said, you got a red light coming up. Which I don't know how he knows, cause he's colorblind, but anyway, that's when we took it away from him.
Well, so that's 3 stories about driving we've heard.
I
That
know.
seems driving's a big
It is a
issue, right?
big deal.
It
So
is.
anybody else got, cause we're getting close on time, anybody else got something you wanna toss
On
out?
that driving, cause my friend, she had taken the keys and she had people with him and he somehow got the keys and his one that got killed by a train a couple years ago. But she had done all she could do, cause he was a widower. But I mean, sometimes it's still, you just can't stop them when they don't have the right logic up there.
Well, and that's where you have to make some peace with yourself, when you're working on the non-license comes into play in these situations. Yes, it's going to be painful to your person, because you do everything you can to keep them from, driving the car, whatever, but is that really harm? It's not doing a bad thing, it's not doing good for them in the present state of mind, but it's not bad because it's helpful, so it takes you back around. And is it fair? Yes, it's fair, because they get in the car and they shouldn't be driving, they're gonna hurt somebody else possibly, never mind just themselves or their property. That's a risk factor. There's certain risk factors that are, going to impact quality of life for somebody, that you can't take those risks. You can't let them be in the car when they get to that point. But as far as like getting out of the house and going for a wander about, okay, they wander, they get hurt, they get lost. You gotta weigh that against their autonomy to be on their own and have some freedom And you have to come to, you have the choice, you don't have to do anything, you have the choice to make some peace with yourself ahead of time, this push thing, make some peace with yourself ahead of time, that if you give them some quality by allowing them not to be totally restricted on movement, and something happens to them, a bad thing happens, they break a heel or get lost, whatever. They got some quality of taking care of themselves before that happened, and then you don't wanna say, well, I didn't really want that to happen, you didn't, but was it bad based on, you're weighing these things. There's no clear cut answer, but you have to weigh. When it gets down to where you're restricting privilege, you just have to decide, is anyone gonna be harmed? What can I live with? Back to, how am I gonna feel about myself? Well, in that case, if you gave him privilege to move around and he had an accident, that's not on you, it happened. It could have happened 25 years ago when he was trying to build a fence, who knows? It could have happened, so things happen, but you have to feel good about yourself. You gave some good by not restricting him totally. So, hopefully that helps some of you think through, process a little bit. And I wish I could give you a guidebook that says, if you have this problem, you do this, and if this, then you can go over here and do this. It's just never gonna be like that, but what can you live with, and what can they live with? And I'll close with this, there's a Public Law 94-142 that's on the books in Louisiana, is that education for children has to be provided in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so this came about with trying to put children with learning differences and so forth into a regular classroom. But the bottom line is, it's teaching by the least restrictive environment. That's what you want to think about with your loved ones. What's the least restrictive? And sometimes restriction is too much. So let them have some freedom and be willing to live with the challenge then that brings. It's hard work, guys, and congratulations to y'all for taking on what you have. Choice or not, you got it and you're doing good. Because you're here today, so you're working it.